Thank you all for joining us for our webinar today to share an overview of SB 15. Once we get our presentation up on the screen, I will walk us through our agenda. Just a second to pull that up. There we go. All right, sorry about that delay. All right. So you're joining us for our webinar on SB 15. Our agenda for today, we'll start by sharing some introductions, and then we will frame the purpose of our webinar for today. Then we'll dive into our SB 15 LEA requirements and our student requirements. Then we'll talk about our proposed changes to the Student Attendance Accounting Handbook. We will take a moment to do a quick Q&A to answer questions that come in through our smart sheet, and then we'll share some next steps and some upcoming webinars for future support. One thing I want to point out is for questions today, we will be capturing questions through a Smartsheet form. You may scan this QR code using your phone, and it will allow you to open a link that will take you directly to the form. We will also be dropping the link to the form in the chat, and you may access that link to drop questions in that you have throughout today's presentation. And if time allows, we will be answering as many questions as we can get to, but please know that there is an SB 15 FAQ that has already been released, and we will be updating the FAQ as questions come in. I can kick off our introductions. My name is Nicole Aguirre. I am the Director of Special Projects for District System Support and Innovation. I'll pass it over to Mega.
Thanks, Nicole. Mega Kansra. I am the Director of System Support and Innovation at the TEA, and also previously, I think, supported a number of districts through some of our programs, professional development on remote learning in particular, including the Resilient Schools Support Program last school year. I will pass it over to my colleague, Joe.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Herrera, and I'm the manager at TEA for the Student Attendance Accounting Handbook and oversee a few other programs within the agency that we regulate for the state of Texas in education.
Awesome, thank you. All right, now we will share our framing for today. So SB 15 was signed into law on September 9th, 2021, and it is in effect through September 1st, 2023. And what this means is that local education agencies may now receive full ADA funding for students who attend a local remote learning program that meet the requirements set by SB 15. So what does SB 15 allow? SB 15 allows districts to provide a local remote learning program, and they can offer instruction either synchronously, asynchronously, or they may do a combination of both. It may be offered for grades K through 12. And for LEAs who have met all of the requirements of SB 15, retroactive funding prior to bill passage for remote learning will be delivered. And there's a few additional flexibilities with SB 15. Hybrid learning, which is a mix of on-campus and remote instruction, is allowable. And LEAs also have the ability to contract with another LEA, keeping in mind that in partnering with another LEA, districts should take into account their ability to serve remote learners. Also, you may have a smaller number of students willing to participate in remote learning at the time, so you may connect with another LEA or partner to offer that instruction. However, just keep in mind that the LEA must meet certain requirements in order to provide a local remote learning program. All right, so now I will pass it over to my colleague Mega, and she will share the SB 15 LEA requirements.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And I do want to note, we actually don't have our chat function enabled today and are just running into a small tech challenge, but rather than sending you links through the chat function, we'll actually follow up via email after this webinar and share with you any of the links to supportive documents that we voice over. So we might mention a couple of documents throughout, and we'll be sure to follow up via email with those documents, unless we can, I think, miraculously just get that chat function piece fixed partway through. But thank you for bearing with us. So before I share just a little bit about the SB 15 LEA requirements, I do want to note we'll be sharing a resource with you as a follow-up that is called the To the Administrator Addressed Letter, or TAA. This letter actually provides a good overview of all of the key requirements of Senate Bill 15. So it's just a great resource to have on hand and a good resource to share with your teammates as well as you're all kind of working to understand the bill and the bill's requirements. So in terms of key requirements, in terms of LEA eligibility and LEA program requirements, first and foremost, in order to receive funding for remote instruction under Senate Bill 15 or SB 15, an LEA must have a C or higher performance rating. Sometimes we get the question of, well, does it matter if I've got a campus that is rated D, but the overall LEA is rated C? We want to note that this really is the overall LEA rating that matters in terms of eligibility and not a campus level rating. And additionally, we want to note that if your campus actually doesn't have a most recent year prior performance rating, for example, if it is an entirely new campus or LEA that has been a new LEA that has been launched or a new charter school, then that you are actually eligible to provide remote learning under this bill. So if you're not rated, you are eligible to provide remote instruction and receive funding under this bill. Additionally, there are some requirements for the local remote learning program that is provided by LEAs in order to be funded under the bill. So first, you must include at least one STAR assessed grade level among the grade levels offered, or you could actually provide a complete high school program. Second, it is necessary in order to receive funding to provide families an on-campus option at the same time. So sometimes we get questions from LEAs about whether, if districts actually shut down, for example, an entire campus and really only provided virtual learning, would students receiving remote instruction in that circumstance be eligible for funding under SB 15. We just want to be clear in that scenario, if that on-campus option is not available to families, then that program requirement is not met. A third key requirement is that LEAs are required to administer assessments to remote students in the same manner as assessments are administered to on-campus students. And then finally, there are a couple of teacher-related requirements as well. First, LEAs are required to provide some level of professional development on virtual instruction to teachers. The content and the timing of the delivery of this professional development is really an LEA by LEA local decision because the bill doesn't actually specify requirements there. And an additional teacher requirement is that teachers may not be required to deliver what is called concurrent instruction. And when we talk about concurrent instruction, we're really talking about the scenario where a teacher is delivering instruction to both remote students and on-campus students at the same time in the same class period. So the bill actually prohibits that type of instruction. And if that is what is being offered, then students receiving instruction in that environment are not eligible to count toward ADA under SB 15. Additionally, SB 15 has a requirement that LEAs may only enroll up to 10% of their total enrollment in a local remote learning program. And there are just a few details to be mindful of in terms of who counts toward that 10% cap. So first, any student who enrolled for even a portion of the year in local remote instruction under Senate Bill 15 counts toward that 10% cap. And then second, beyond students who are receiving instruction under Senate Bill 15, the bill also explicitly notes that any student who received more than 50% of their instructional days via remote learning do count toward that 10% cap. And this includes students who are medically fragile, students who were placed in a remote learning setting by an admission review and dismissal committee or ARD committee, as well as students receiving accommodations under Section 504, and students who are served via remote conferencing. And just for those of you who might be looking at that term remote conferencing and wondering what that is, please note we will actually share a few details about that closer to the end of this webinar, because we realize that's a relevant topic for a few of you as well. And one additional detail to know about the bill is that LEAs will receive local remote learning program evaluation ratings. So these are A through F evaluation ratings. These are publicly posted, but we do want to note that these ratings are not associated with any form of improvement, intervention, or sanction requirements in statute that are otherwise typically associated with campus and district accountability ratings. And we want to note that for the purpose of calculating these performance ratings, students who spend at least half of their instructional time receiving remote instruction are considered enrolled in remote instruction for the purpose of calculating these ratings. So this is just one thing to keep in mind as you are working on implementation of remote learning under Senate Bill 15. With that, I'll share just a little bit more as well about student eligibility requirements to count toward ADA under Senate Bill 15. So the bill actually sets forth, I think we just covered a lot of requirements that LEAs need to follow, but the bill does set forth a set of requirements for students to be eligible to count toward ADA. So first, based on information from the preceding school year, if a student received remote instruction for a majority of their instructional days, so that is more than 50% of their instructional days in the previous school year, they need to have met 3 key criteria in order to be eligible to count toward ADA. So first, they must have achieved satisfactory achievement or higher on each STAR assessment administered. We want to note here that if a STAR assessment was not administered, a different assessment can be administered that shows grade level proficiency in TEKS. So for example, this could be the STAR beginning of year assessment. The second key criteria is that the student must have had a number of unexcused absences, that is 10% or fewer out of all of their instructional days. Third, the student must have earned a grade of C or higher in the foundation curriculum courses taken virtually or remotely in the preceding school year. Now, in addition to these criteria from the preceding school year, there are additional criteria to consider from the current school year. So if a student didn't receive a majority of their instructional time in the preceding school year via remote instruction, the criteria that I just walked through on the prior slide actually don't apply to determine student eligibility for remote learning. But the criteria for the current school year apply to all students. So the criteria to look at for the current school year are: 1, that the student is enrolled in a school district or open enrollment charter school; 2, that the student has reasonable access to in-person services at a district or school facility; and 3, that the student has fewer than 10 unexcused absences over a 6-month period. And we want to note, we often get a question of, well, will we be funded if our student, hits that point of 10 unexcused absences at some point in the year? Will we be funded for the portion of the year where the student remained below 10 unexcused absences? The answer there is yes. You will actually be funded up until that point where that student is no longer eligible, i.e. when they hit that 10 unexcused absences point, and from that point forward. And with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Joe, to share some proposed changes to the student attendance accounting handbook.
Thank you, Mega. So on this slide, we've given you a link at the top to the proposed language as it's posted out on our website. Again, that'll be a link that we will make sure that gets emailed to the group that is participating today so that you have that proposed language. Sort of in summary and to make it easy to understand, we're going to start with the idea of remote synchronous instruction. So that has come back and is being reintroduced to our LEAs as a result of Senate Bill 15. And with remote synchronous instruction comes with it remote synchronous attendance. And for PEIMS purposes, we have also reintroduced remote synchronous present codes for that method of instruction. Along with synchronous instruction is asynchronous instruction that will also require the need to reintroduce LEAs to remote asynchronous present codes for those kiddos that are present asynchronously, and then a combination of both should your LEA decide in its plan to provide both combination of each method of instruction. But with each method of instruction comes that need for counting attendance in a remote synchronous present or asynchronous present code. So let's talk about what attendance needs to look like and how you take attendance in our next slide. So synchronous attendance, again, is very much like last year and what you are used to. But I will say that we really did hear from the field on some of the hurdles and constraints that maybe synchronous attendance and instruction put on LEAs. So we really wanted to be mindful of those concerns as they were voiced to us when we were putting together documentation for the Student Attendance Accounting Handbook. So just as a reminder, synchronous attendance is daily attendance that is taken at an official attendance taking time, or an OAT, as PEIMS coordinators might know it as. So still in keeping with an official attendance taking time that kiddos have to meet for attendance. We wanted to make it very clear this year because it really wasn't part of our vocabulary and our language that synchronous attendance means that the camera is on and that the teacher can see the student. We're going to mimic just like as if you were physically on your campus. When you're physically on your campus, you can see a student, interact with them, and the same thing needs to occur for synchronous instruction. Cameras need to be on. You need to see the kiddo's face and have an idea that they're actually there, seeing them. Now, if your local plan wants to put some parameters behind how long that student needs to be on camera, that is a local decision. But we are saying that for attendance to count, a teacher needs to see the student on camera. Also, very much like in-person attendance, for synchronous attendance, if you are providing synchronous instruction and taking synchronous attendance, then that student needs to be in attendance at the official attendance taking time. So in before and as in the past, if a student showed up at their funding period, second period, typically, they were counted present. If a student was not in their second period and they were not counted present for any other fundable purpose, they were counted absent. If that same student showed up third period and finished the day, they attended school, they got credit for the time that they were in those particular classes, but for funding purposes, they were counted absent for the day. Same thing goes here. So if students are attending synchronous instruction and attendance is taking synchronously, then the student needs to be in class on camera, viewable by the teacher at the official attendance taking time. And then we also want to remind folks that the 2 to 4 hour rule for ADA funding still applies. You still have to provide at least 2 to 4 hours of daily instruction to have funding count. And that's sort of a overview of what synchronous looks like, very much like last year, with just a few, what we hope are some caveats that will make that a little bit easier for us. So let's look at what asynchronous looks like. So asynchronous, again, hearing what was important to LEAs and to those that are out on the field and how attendance worked last year, we want to make sure that we've at least allowed for a little bit of ease in doing so. So LEAs still have the 24-hour period that a student can engage in to be marked present asynchronously. However, you can write your local plan and policy for this to narrow down that time frame if you need to. So what is an example of a time frame that could be narrowed down? Maybe you narrow down your time frame to when school operates. That's a local decision that we can make, that we're allowing LEAs to make to help with the unintentional hunting for students who may have engaged outside of school hours well into the evening, and also maybe reduce some of that stress level that teachers had with having to feel like they may need to consistently look for attendance engagement into the evening hours. So with asynchronous attendance, again, we're still following the 2 to 4 hour rule for engagement. You have to at least offer 2 to 4 hours of engagement so that attendance can be funded. And then how a student gets counted for attendance, again, is the same. But you want to note in here that a student must show that they accessed instruction through either logging on to an LMS, through a daily interaction between the student or the teacher, or by completing an assignment and turning it in. Where you might feel like you have to measure the level of engagement that a student had, again, we're going to allow our LEAs to determine what that level of engagement means if they want to go beyond just seeing that a student logged on and accessed instruction. So in our next slide, I'm going to turn it over to the panel to talk, to see if there are any questions and answers, which might be a little difficult without our chat feature here, but we do know that we have some questions that have come in prior.
Thanks, Joe. And before we jump into FAQs, if Nicole, you don't mind projecting once again, I just wanted to share a little bit of additional information about remote conferencing, which was an option that we mentioned just a little bit earlier as an alternative way to provide remote learning. We'll just get the slides back up here in a second.
Just a second, I'm refreshing. We've added an additional slide for you guys to access our links for today.
Good, on the spot problem solving. So thank you for bearing with us. We want to make sure y'all have access to our resources.
All righty. Here we go.
And Nicole, we aren't quite seeing the slides yet.
You're not. Oh, let's try that again. Looks like it just kicked me out of our slide deck.
Here, I'll go ahead and give it a go. 1 second. All right, well, thank you for bearing with me. It's always a little bit of comic effect when you're having a conversation about remote learning, and we have fun technical issues. So thank you again for bearing with us. We had mentioned earlier that an alternative option for offering remote instruction is remote conferencing. Now, in order to provide remote instruction via remote conferencing, there are a few requirements that have to be met. So first, there are a couple of requirements that have to be met, no matter what. The student is unable to attend school because of a temporary medical condition. And secondly, the total amount of remote conferencing instruction does not exceed more than 20 instructional days over the entirety of the school year. To go beyond those 20 instructional days would actually require a waiver. In addition to those two first requirements, at least one of the three requirements listed here must also be met. So first, that the student's temporary medical condition is documented by a physician licensed to practice in the United States. And that documentation must include a statement from the physician that the student is to remain confined to their home or hospital. Or second, the student might have a positive test result for a communicable condition that is listed in the portion of Texas code that's listed here. One of the conditions that is applicable here is indeed COVID-19. Or a third potential requirement that could be met here is that the student could have been identified as having been in close contact with COVID-19. So we put this remote conferencing option out there because we realize that as you're listening to the information around Senate Bill 15 and considering whether or not you would be able to count certain students toward eligibility, and you're considering all of the potential scenarios in which remote instruction might be an option or might need to be an option for some of your students, remote conferencing is one other option to consider in that mix. Just for a little bit more information here, there are a few key differences between remote conferencing and remote learning under Senate Bill 15. So these are all things to consider when you're really trying to figure out the right option to offer to your students and families. So first, in terms of the enrollment cap, remote conferencing doesn't have a cap. We do want to note, as we mentioned earlier, if you are also seeking to implement local remote learning under Senate Bill 15, if a student receives remote conferencing for more than 50% of their instructional days, they do count toward that 10% enrollment cap under Senate Bill 15. And of course, as we discussed, when it comes to local remote learning under Senate Bill 15, we do have that 10% cap. In terms of time frame, remote conferencing is certainly a temporary learning option that really cannot exceed 20 instructional days without a waiver. Local remote learning under Senate Bill 15 can be used for temporary or long-term remote learning. We do want to note, of course, the bill does have an end date of September 1st, 2023. So there is some end date that is laid out in the bill when we think about long-term. In terms of PEIMS coding, the two are treated similarly. Attendance code 1 through 6 would be applicable. All LEAs are eligible to offer remote conferencing. There isn't a performance rating requirement there, whereas for Senate Bill 15, only those LEAs with C or higher performance rating are eligible to receive funding for remote instruction offered under Senate Bill 15. Under remote conferencing, there is a requirement that there must be a minimum of 2 hours of synchronous instruction for elementary students and 4 hours for secondary school students on a daily basis. And then when it comes to Senate Bill 15, there is more flexibility here because Senate Bill 15, as Nicole covered just a little bit earlier, does allow for funding for remote learning delivered in a synchronous format, asynchronous format, or a combination of synchronous and asynchronous formats. Again, whichever format you follow, you do have to meet the requirements that are defined in the student attendance accounting handbook, as Joe laid out. And then finally, both options actually do not allow for concurrent instruction. So again, concurrent instruction is when a teacher is instructing remote and on-campus students at the same time in the same class period. So both options do not allow for that. We did just go ahead, given our challenges with chat, we went ahead and popped a few key resources and links onto this slide. You might go ahead and kind of screenshot and type in the URL if you're looking to access the resource right away, just to voice over what these resources are. That to the administrator addressed letter that is linked at the top, that is essentially an overview of the key requirements and stipulations of the bill. So it's a nice kind of introduction to the bill. It also includes information on additional webinars we will be hosting to provide information on best practices, to support those LEAs that are seeking to implement remote learning. The second resource that's linked here is really that proposed language for the student attendance accounting handbook that Joe mentioned a little bit earlier. So if you click into that, you'll see more about the attendance and instructional minutes requirements and just a lot more detail there that's helpful to know as you're thinking about implementation. Third, we have a frequently asked questions document. So as you can imagine, we've been receiving lots of questions from the field and we want to be helpful. So we've released this FAQ document that helps answer over 30 different questions that we have commonly received. So you might find some of the answers to your questions right in that document, and we do intend to actually keep updating that document over time. And then finally, I just voiced over this alternate option that is not connected to Senate Bill 15 of remote conferencing. If you want to learn more in terms of the guidance around remote conferencing, as well as take a look at some of the frequently asked questions and answers around remote conferencing, that fourth resource that we have linked here is a good way to get a sense there. All right, with that, I might have a teammate jumping in on the kind of question and answer portion of this session. If you haven't already, feel free to scan the QR code that is here on the right-hand side of the page, or if you want to, just type it in. We've also provided a URL here. That's that tiny URL down at the bottom. So feel free to click into that link, access our form and submit your questions. That'll help us just get a sense of the questions out there so we can prioritize and answer them in our remaining time on this webinar.
Right. So Mega, there have actually been a few questions that have come in through our smart sheet. So I'll read one of them off for you that we can answer out loud. So one of the questions that came in was, for students who are homebound, can we provide remote learning instead of homebound services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do, and actually, Joe, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so remote homebound is an option, but that is a waiver needs to be submitted for that. General homebound is a waiver is not needed for that. A committee is met, decided that the homebound service would be best used to serve that student. Once that homebound committee is thinking about serving homebound remotely, then they need to submit a waiver to the agency for that approval.
Speaking of waivers, Joe, another question came in that asked, can you elaborate more on the waiver needed if a student exceeds 20 days of remote conferencing?
Sure. So 20 days of remote conferencing, we sort of give you, free and clear. But if it looks like that student is going to need more than 20 days of remote conferencing, and remember, remote conferencing is very different from homebound, where homebound is a medical condition that was 4 weeks or more, and then the student receives in-person instruction for 4 weeks, 4 hours a week. Remote conferencing is a temporary medical condition that we recognize may last more than 20 days. But that instruction is 4 hours of synchronous instruction daily. So if you determine that That 20-day period is going to need to last a little bit longer than that. Then a waiver would be submitted to go beyond the 20 days.
Thank you for that, Joe. Another question that has come in is, if a student didn't take STAR last year, do they have to take a BOY assessment to determine funding eligibility?
Great question. So again, we do want to stress before even answering that question that the STAR assessment requirement in terms of student eligibility really only applies to those students who received a majority of their instructional days via remote instruction in the preceding school year. So first, just want to make sure we're thinking about that piece of the puzzle. But then secondly, if the student actually did not take the STAR assessment, we do recommend the beginning of year assessment. We can certainly also share a little bit more information, and I will pull up the additional information. The beginning of year assessment is available for use until October 15th, and we can direct you to, I think, question 9 in the FAQ provides more information about how to access it. If the BOY assessment is not an option, we will note that SB 15 does actually authorize a school system to administer an alternative assessment. And, as long as that assessment is designed to show grade level proficiency on the TEKS for students who didn't participate in state assessments in the prior year, that assessment could be an eligible alternative or substitute in this scenario.
Thank you, Mega. Joe, I have another question for you. Can there be a different official attendance taking time for different grade levels? For example, first grade is at 9:40, but second grade is at 10.
So the Student Attendance Accounting Handbook allows for each individual campus to have their own attendance taking time and track. If an alternate is if an alternate is needed for a specific group of individuals, then they need to be put on their own track, and then board approval needs to be to approve that alternate attendance time is happening for that group of individual kids.
Thank you for that, Joe. Let's see, quite a few more questions came in. I will address a couple around today's webinar session. There was a question around resources. Will this recording be shared? All of these resources from today will be made available to everyone who's participating.
Just a quick addition there, we will post the recording as well. It will be available to, on our TEA website. So you'll be able to very, very easily share that link with others, maybe others you work with who haven't seen it.
I think we have time for another question. Are LEAs required to offer a local remote learning program?
Yes, the very clear answer there is no. No LEAs are required to offer a local remote learning program.
All right. And then another question came in around performance ratings for LEAs and districts. What year will the performance rating be selected from?
So we're looking for your last performance rating. I think this will generally be, this will generally be the 2018-19 school year. For your performance rating, in some rare cases, it might be a prior year, but we're looking for your most recent performance rating.
Awesome. And then another question came in around what students count towards the 10% cap?
Great question. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull up that page again, just so that it's a little bit easier for folks to track those requirements. I realize there's a good bit in here. in terms of who counts toward that 10% cap. So first, any student who is enrolled for even a portion of the year in local remote instruction under SB 15 does count toward that cap. And then second, separate from Senate Bill 15, any student who received more than 50% of their instructional days via remote learning do count toward that cap. And this does include students who are medically fragile, students who were placed in a remote learning setting, perhaps by an ARD committee, or they're receiving accommodations under Section 504, or even those students who are served via remote conferencing. So we do want to note a distinction there on the remote conferencing front. If you do the remote conferencing for up to 20 days without a waiver, and that's all the student really receives in terms of remote learning, that student would not count toward that 10% cap. But if they receive, for example, a waiver to go beyond 20 days, or they have a rare exceptional circumstance that really has them extend beyond those 20 days, where maybe they're in close contact many times throughout the school year, and they receive remote conferencing, and it exceeds in some more than 50% of their instructional days in terms of remote learning, then that student will count toward that 10% cap.
Thank you. We have one other question that has come in. Does a teacher need to be certified in the grade they would support virtual instruction?
Yes, so the same certification requirements that generally apply for instructing on-campus students also apply for delivering remote instruction under Senate Bill 15.
Awesome. I think we'll go through one more question, but you guys can continue to submit questions. We will take all of these questions to update our FAQ. Do students served in a virtual program count in the accountability calculations at their home school, even if they never attended the home school? And I'm going to make the assumption that they never physically attended the home school.
Yes, this is a really good question, and we do actually get this one a bit as well. So we do want to note that yes, you would count toward your home campus's accountability rating as well, in addition to the program rating that is assigned for remote students. That is separate, the local remote students who have spent at least half of their instructional time receiving remote instruction. So two separate ratings that might apply here.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so we will, let me share my screen. Hopefully it works for you all this time. Okay, it's given. Okay. Here we go. So I do want to share our next steps. Okay. Sorry about this. It's making me start from the very beginning. All right. Again, I wanted to put up our QR code for submitting questions just in case you were unable to capture this earlier. You're able to access this by either entering the tiny URL code that is on the bottom of this screen, or you can use the camera on your phone to scan and it will open the form for you. I wanted to make sure that everybody had access to that. And then the SB 15 FAQ is released and available on our website. And as questions come in, we will continue to update with questions that are asked from the field. And we'll go into our next steps in closing. So for, Missing this one. Where did it go? We have some upcoming webinars planned for you all. We have 4 additional webinars that will take place in October. If you had, thank you, Mega. If you had received the original TAA that was released, we have updated the dates on that document. So please update your calendars to the dates that are listed on the screen. We will host 4 additional webinars, one that focuses on asynchronous instruction and attendance tracking best practices. We'll host another one on synchronous instruction best practices. There will be one on learning management system best practices. And then in November, we will host a final SB 15 webinar related to teacher professional development resources and best practices. The links to all of these webinars are in the TAA that was released, and you may pre-register for those events, and it will allow you to add it to your calendar there. Again, I apologize for the technology issues today. My computer just did not want to cooperate. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you later in October.
And I might add just one more thing. We will, of course, follow up to everybody who registered for this webinar with all of the links to the documents, as well as registration links to these upcoming webinars if you are seeking to join some of these. And then additionally, I'll note we do have an email address where you can reach out if you've got some questions or some follow-up for us. It is, this one's easy enough to remember that I'll just say it out loud. It is remote.learning@tea.texas.gov. So that is remote.learning@tea.texas.gov. Well, thank you all. Nicole, if there's anything else to say here, go for it.
That's all. Thanks so much for joining us.